Hey everyone, my name is Dr. Dolores Tarver. I'm a licensed psychologist here in Georgia, and it is time for the TT Time with Dr. Tarver is a wellness-based podcast. It is not intended to be a substitute for a relationship with a licensed mental health provider. I know you think I've been away. I actually haven't. Last week joined Dr. Ambrose Past Turner and was talking about the experience of being a parent with a child who was diagnosed with ADHD. So that episode, when it's available, I'll drop so you all can have proof that I was in fact here last week on Tuesday. But it's always good to be back on my own podcast talking to you in this series that we're in, where we're just addressing all of the different things that people experience during this holiday season. November, December tends to just be tougher months for people for a variety of different reasons. And I think that I always feel like during this holiday season, I have this strong desire to have at least one episode on some type of boundary and being able to navigate the holidays. It just can be so difficult to maintain mental, physical, financial wellness during this holiday season. I've talked before about how we can be in those patterns of overspending, how we can over obligate ourselves to things, how we can just be anxious and overwhelmed trying to host people, trying to make sure that everybody's well and they're okay and they enjoy their holidays and bringing that cheer, which can be very draining for us. I do also think that sometimes we will overextend ourselves or focus more on other people out of a sense of obligation that ultimately puts us in a position where we're causing ourselves harm. That being said, I know that many of you may have heard or even watched at this point the Netflix documentary on Diddy entitled Sean Combs' The Reckoning, which is produced by Chris Jackson, otherwise known as 50 Cent. The documentary is very similar to me to the one that was focused on R. Kelly, surviving R. Kelly. And whenever something like this comes out, it generates a lot of discussion. People start talking about whether or not things were consensual and whether or not somebody is just now regretting decisions that they've made, or is it about money, or is this person really a predator? And oftentimes we are evaluating what we're seeing in these documentaries, for example, on our past experiences, on experiences we know of people who are in our lives. And a lot of times it also really gets at what if some of our own values may be. And so I feel like this is a good opportunity for me to provide some general information for people just around trauma responses, as well as guidelines for people who may be navigating having conversations about experiences they've had associated with trauma, but also just being in spaces where you don't feel safe, where you don't feel heard, where you don't feel valued, where you feel as if you are having conversations that are falling on deaf ears. I do want to also take this time to highlight again, if you did not see the episode When the Soul Remembers, where I'm interviewing Tiffany Luke, LPC, who is a trauma informed specialist, please make sure you go and take a look at that. Like, Tiffany does an outstanding job of really breaking trauma down. She has a lot of resources on her pages aimed at trying to help people not only understand but recognize they can be healed and have well lives and be able to navigate environments where people are constantly questioning whether or not their experience is valid and real and why they still have it even after all this time has passed. So, that being said, I want to just start with just some general information. And trauma, it can range, but ideally, it is something where a person feels an overwhelming response because they either felt like they weren't safe, they saw or witnessed someone else not being safe, they experienced an enduring pattern, long standing pattern of characteristics in experiences in which they were neglected, and that could be neglection with in terms of not having enough food. It could be neglected in terms of not having love and caring people in your life. It could be neglect in which you didn't consistently have home to live in. Again, consistently not having access to running water or transportation, lights, right? So the basic needs. So the neglect piece comes from not having those basic needs met. It could come from being in experiences where people left you alone and you were responsible for or had to figure out how to take care of things without someone being there. You might have been responsible for trying to navigate how siblings were going to eat. You may have been in spaces where people were sexually violating you. You may have been in spaces where you were talked down to, degraded, criticized, cursed out. You may have been in environments where there was physical abuse, or you saw or witnessed other people being physically abused, or where there was violence. So there's any number of things that could be considered a traumatic experience, including being in relationships where you felt exploited or degraded, or that you didn't have power and your body wasn't your own. Whenever you experience that trauma, it triggers in the brain a survival response. That survival response can look like fight, flight, freeze, or fawn. And I know you've heard those terms before, maybe not as familiar with fawn, but they're automatic reactions. And the purpose of them is to help people be able to escape or survive something that they consider to be threatening, or at the very least unsafe, or they feel powerless. And this automatic response is actually controlled by our brain. So if you took any intro psych classes, the amygdala, the hippocampus, the prefrontal cortex, so the place where our reasoning is held, the place where our emotions are held, the place where our fear response is held, are activated whenever we experience the traumatic um, situation, or we're reminded of something that's traumatic. That could be via a sight, a sound, a smell, a touch, a taste, something that can put us back in the space. Our body can't tell the difference. So whether it is a real live threat in my face, it's imagined because I'm reliving or re-experiencing something associated with it, or I'm in an environment that reminds my body for whatever reason, my brain for whatever reason, that this is very similar to how we felt the last time we were in an unsafe situation, and I will respond exactly the same. Which is why you can be in the grocery store and hear a loud noise and be startled, even though there wasn't anyone directly in front of you. Your life isn't in danger, but it reminds you. And so automatically, then you want to what? Escape. So that is the flight response. The flight response is, how can I get out of this dangerous situation? How can I escape harm? How can I reduce the potential for harm? So maybe I'm getting harmed, but I can come out a little bit, not as scathed as I would be if I'm able to get out of here. And that's where that amygdala kicks in, because it's going to kick that adrenaline up, and it is going to allow us to be able, when you see people pick up cars, when you see people bust through doors, when you see people run at high speeds, to be able to get away from someone. That is the flight response. The fight response is in those instances where I feel like I have to defend myself against a threat. And again, the threat may not necessarily be something that someone looking outside observing would perceive as a threat, but the person experiencing it perceives it as a threat. This is also an amygdala response. That's where all of our emotions are spearheaded. If you've ever watched Fairly Odd Parents, there's an episode where Timmy Turner, his amygdala is removed. And so he's out here with no emotions, just doing whatever, right? Because the amygdala allows us to be able to perceive what's dangerous. It sends those signals to us to prepare us, like, hey, I gotta be ready to fight by any means necessary, whatever I need to do, so that I can come out of this situation alive. And that can be with a person, that can be and then you have seen people and you say, wow, that response seemed really exaggerated for the situation. They're knocking stuff over and tearing stuff down, right? But in their mind, there was an experience that they were going to be able to have to get through, and so they were ready to fight themselves through it. The freeze response is oftentimes where people will have regrets, because what happens is the brain gets completely overwhelmed, and there is actually a temporary paralysis, an inability to act. So in my mind, I might be screaming, I might be thinking all of the things that I want to say or do, but I literally cannot move. And this is actually triggered, or I will say controlled by our parasympathetic nervous system. And oftentimes that immobilization leads to feelings of guilt and shame. Why didn't I fight back? Why didn't I do everything I could? And I often, when I'm talking to people who have experienced trauma and they're reliving these experiences and trying to really understand why they weren't able to act differently, there's always signs for us that something is uncomfortable, where we dissociate, we check out, our body stiffens up, we're not moving. It's like limp, and so those are also indications that a person is saying no, which you will hear me say all the time, that there is only one type of consent, and that is enthusiastic. So if someone is laying there and they're not responding, um, and you continue to do whatever it is you're doing, then you are doing it without their consent, right? But that is often where the guilt and shame comes from, is because people, and they're feeling this internalized shame, because oftentimes, and this is where people are engaged in victim blaming. Why didn't you do that? You could have done that. Why didn't you yell? Why didn't you scream? Why didn't you fight them? Why didn't you tell somebody? Not really understanding this paralysis that occurs is not a voluntary paralysis. Nobody signs up to not be able to fight. But when the brain becomes overwhelmed, and the parts of my brain that are going to move my appendages is overwhelmed, then I'm not going to be able to kick that into gear. And that's no less me fighting back than it is if I run, or if I stand and fight. It is simply a response. All of these are responses to people not feeling safe. Then we have the fawn response. And the fawn response is similar to the freeze response, in that oftentimes people will feel guilt and shame about it, because they feel like they didn't advocate for themselves, they didn't stand up for themselves. The fawn response is that people pleasing. Um, so what ends up happening is I'm disconnected, right? And this is why I say it's very similar for the freeze. This is why oftentimes people will dissociate. So they're not connected to their emotions and their sensations and their needs. They are focused on what can I do, to engage this individual so that they don't harm me, right? So that I don't bring forth their wrath. And oftentimes you will see this nurtured in childhood, because children did not feel safe to be able to express themselves. They didn't feel safe to be able to express their needs. They knew that there was going to be a negative consequence associated with that. So whether that came from a parent or some other caregiver or grandmother, might have come from a teacher or someone, even in the spiritual realm of being someone who was in a faith-based organization. And so what they do then is I'll beat up on myself, I'll criticize myself, I'll say I'm not worthy, I'll engage in self-harm behaviors. And not because I'm intentionally wanting to harm myself, but because I don't believe I'm worthy or deserving. And so, what ends up happening when people have kind of experienced a traumatic event or events in their lives, and this fawn response is the outcome, and it starts particularly in childhood. As they grow into adulthood, then this is your person who becomes more codependent in relationships, who wants, needs, longs for that affirmation and that validation of being chosen, of wanting to be with this person, wanting them to be loved, to love them so bad, that they'll do anything for that love, even if it costs them themselves. You'll see a lot of depression and some somatic symptoms of pain and illness in people, when they have a history of engaging in the fawn response. So, why is all of this important, Tarver? At any given point, a person who experienced a traumatic event is having a conflict within themselves between their need to flee or fight in a dangerous situation, to be attached to someone they love and care about, even if that person is perpetrating the abuse against them, not being able to discern when they're safe and when they're not safe, not feeling as if they have control over their bodies, trying everything that they can to speak up, but being paralyzed and unable to do so, and also the trying to escape the immense pain and shame and guilt associated with this. It is not uncommon for people to feel so powerless that they really truly don't feel like they have another choice. And even though logically, people on the outside, because we always have our opinions unsolicited or not, where you're bigger than this person, you're stronger than this person, you're faster than this person, you're smarter than this person. They no longer have this power over you. However, emotionally, financially, psychologically, they in fact do feel powerless. And so, even though reasonably we think that doesn't make sense, that is because oftentimes we don't understand the effect of trauma and the trauma responses. And so, we begin to make statements about who this person is, what their values are, what they must like, based on what experienced during their trauma. It does not take into account at all biological, cognitive, or affective effects of trauma, financial effects of trauma, childhood history, um, whether or not a person is in a position to be able to defend themselves in ways that they feel like they can defend themselves, because it's about their perception. It fuels shame behaviors. It contributes to this desensitization we have of predatory and abusive behaviors, and oftentimes comes across as us attacking people who are brave enough to share what they've experienced. Well, why did it take you so long to bring that up? Well, why'd you stay in that situation? You must have liked it, because if you wouldn't, you would have left, because nobody would be doing that to me. You're a grown person. You need to take responsibility for your behavior. So if we on the outside are making these statements, what do you think this person who is experiencing this trauma and having that internal battle every day, what they must be thinking about themselves, and why it's so hard for people to discuss what has happened to them? When people experience trauma, they have a lot of different symptoms. One of them is hypervigilance. There's this constant being alert, not feeling safe, looking around for threats, this heightened state of awareness, and it is absolutely exhausting, which is oftentimes why people will try to suppress that. And they often will try to suppress that through the use of substances. Or they may try to do it through people, having someone with me so I feel safe, having a weapon with me so I feel safe. There are constant flashbacks and intrusive thoughts. They're fragmented. If you think about when you try to organize things into a file cabinet and you just kind of throw them in there, and then you try to come look for them, and you might find in this folder one part of the document, somewhere else another one is folded at the bottom. That's how intrusive these thoughts are. They're oftentimes very scattered, and they feel as if it's happening all over again. They can come from what seems like out of nowhere. It can come from conversations. It may come from bodily experiences that are similar to what a person experienced um, during the traumatic event or events, and they can't control it, particularly if they haven't had the training to be able to really help navigate them. And so, what do we want to do? We don't want to experience that. So, what am I going to try to do? I'm going to try to push those memories down as far as I can so that they don't come to light. I'm going to try to avoid anything that reminds me of that, whether that's a person or topics or whatever. Or again, I'm going to be in a state where I'm not as conscious, so I don't have to really think about it. Dissociation I mentioned quite a bit, but I don't think I've really explained it. What happens is, think about your brain having a room, and it a quiet room. You know how when you get overstimulated with sensory information, you go to some places and they'll have what they call a quiet room, or it may be a sensory room, they may refer to it as, but it protects you from continuing to get stimuli over and over again. And what happens when people are having flashbacks, as they're triggered or they're having intrusive thoughts, all of these things are going on with them, it's pain. It is overwhelmingly painful. And it can range from just feeling numb, um, to literally disconnecting from reality. And so it seems as if you are watching yourself. Like, I see all of that. That's me I'm looking at, but I don't experience any of it because I'm up here disconnected. And this is oftentimes what people will do, particularly in childhood, when they've been sexually abused or physically abused. We'll see adults do that as well when they are in situations where there are perpetrators or there is constant abuse. They'll disconnect, even during physical exams. People will dissociate and disconnect because of the sensation reminds them of something they've experienced. You'll be talking to people and you're looking at them, but they don't quite look like they're there. And you check in with them and it brings them back, and they won't be able to tell you what you were just talking about. The numbness often also leads to avoidance behaviors. Talked a lot over the past several years about avoidance behaviors. Anything that is going to cause us a pain, um, to re experience aspects of the trauma that reminds us of the trauma. That can be a person, it can be a place, it can be a situation, it can be a smell, like I said, a sight, a sound. And so, because of that, what we'll do is we'll try to put some space between ourselves and those feelings, or we will be completely numbed and checked out, not able to access anything, because again, we're disconnected from our emotions. And it's not just the ones that are challenging, that are hard. Even joy, even intimacy, those things that one would consider to be positive, can also be things that people can't access, because it's almost as if that emotional center is, again, it's not functioning, it's broken, it's frozen. And so I don't experience anything at all. And people will often talk about that for some of our military service people, particularly those that experienced a military sexual trauma, or were in a combat zone. So, that being said, we got a little bit of background on that, and it's just some general background, some information. Definitely encourage you to do some reading, explore some options. There's a lot of good resources out that really talk about trauma and healing. The Body Keeps the Score comes to mind. It's one of my favorites that really just talks about how we store things in our bodies. But there's some really good PTSD workbooks that I really like as well. So, as people are sharing stories about their trauma, I want to offer this guidance. One, I definitely would not recommend that you attempt to start fully processing your trauma experience without the assistance of a licensed mental health provider. You knew you were going to get that plug for therapy. And that is because it is I didn't talk as much about the cognitive aspects of trauma, but there are a lot of distortions that come along with a trauma experience. And we often run the risk of solidifying some distortions, engaging in repetitive patterns of behavior that lead to potential other opportunities for victimization when we are sharing and we're not in safe spaces with safe people who can guide us and help us deal with the cognitive components, the overwhelming feelings in the body, being able to help us navigate a plan for how we're going to address things, and being able to deal with those flashbacks and those nightmares and those triggers. And as I discussed in the episode I was referencing other earlier with Tiffany, is you may need a team of providers. You may want somebody who's a somatic therapist that just focuses on how you're experiencing things in your body, to be able to better manage and navigate those, to understand when you become activated. She does a really good job of talking about being triggered and versus being activated. You also may need a mental health provider who focuses on those cognitions, fueling filtering through rather all of the things that you're hearing from people, the things that you've begun to believe about yourself, and the shame experiences, all of those. You may have physical providers, physical care providers on your team. They might be doing pelvic floor with you. They might be addressing those GI issues that you're having as a result of the trauma experience and where you're carrying the trauma. But it is very important that you have those licensed providers who are safe, who are trained, who are guided, because otherwise you may be experiencing or sharing your experiences with people who, one, may not be safe people. So they may exploit your experience to use it for their own personal gain. And that's the thing about predators. They already recognize when people have these vulnerabilities and they're looking to exploit those vulnerabilities. So if they can find that crack in the armor, they're going to absolutely take it and manipulate it to then you're now in a position where you have a predator who you're also looking to for your safety, or your financial or their financial support or their affirmation, right? And so then that sets you back up, right, to be re-victimized. Also, you may be in spaces with people who aren't going to keep your information private. And so one of the things that, we joke about it, but it's true. Sometimes the only way to keep a secret, right? You've heard that before, if it's the other person is not alive. And that is because there isn't a guarantee that your information won't be shared, and that it might be shared inaccurately by people. And sometimes when you experience a trauma, is incredibly difficult to understand who you can trust and who you can't trust, particularly if a lot of your trauma centers around you not feeling like you were enough and validated in seeking and desiring someone to be there and to love you. Then you're constantly looking for people. You're latching on, right? That whole dependency piece that can come in there. Again, particularly the people who have experienced fawn behaviors are at really high risk for that. I think it's also important for you to really understand that the social media is not a place for you to express yourself. What happens is you got people trolling, and they're looking to be able to get likes and shares, and they're looking. Some of them just are some keyboard bullies, and so they're looking to attack you. But also, people don't benefit from you being well. They don't benefit from you sharing, growing, healing, learning, giving yourself grace and peace. And so they want to keep you in this experience of you not having the capacity to be able to respond in healthy ways to things you experience. Right. So, as we're younger, if we have a good foundation, we're able to recognize that there are going to be hard things, there are going to be challenging things, there are going to be things that we have to navigate through, but they'll pass. But when you've experienced a trauma, first of all, you didn't even have the opportunity to have any coping skills develop, but it also affects your brain development. And so, on a cellular level, now what I've done is, instead of the safety background that I should have received, now it's unsafe. That foundation is unsafe. And when my foundation is unsafe, then I'm going to be looking for things to try to make me feel safe. And oftentimes those aren't going to necessarily be healthy things. So you don't want to be on social media where any number of people can have the potential to be able to comment on, or either to try to steer and guide your story. It's important that you tell your story, that you tell it with people who can help you navigate through it, and that you understand that it is a piece of you, but not who you are in totality. And just because people say something doesn't mean it's true. But oftentimes we're not in positions to be able to balance and navigate all of that if we're in this trauma experience and we haven't had a chance to really understand our responses and our reactions and our activations and our triggers, right? And being able to navigate that. You all know it, it would not be possible for me to say, not to say rather, that you're loved. You're loved, you're needed, you're valued, you're enough. And you can be treated in loving ways, and you deserve to be treated in loving ways. And so, as you're navigating this experience, do know that that does not make you unlovable. It never did. So, give yourself some grace, and some kindness and some empathy in this journey. Now, if you then are going into spaces during the holidays, That could be an office party. You may have been violated by someone you work with. This could be a family gathering. You might have been um, sexually assaulted by a family member. This may be a community event, any number of these things, right? Excuse me. Um, where you might come into contact with someone who has harmed you. That's how I know I've been talking too much. My throat got dry. Um, so let's kind of talk about how to navigate that. So we talked several episodes again about no contact versus kind of limited contact, essentially. Um, there are going to be times when the person who perpetrated this trauma against you, you don't need to have contact with them. These are not going to be people who are safe. They're not going to allow you to be safe. They're going to continue to try to put you in a place to exploit, victimize, harm, take advantage of, abuse you. And so they're just a no. So there are going to be times when you simply say, I'm not coming if so and so is coming. And you don't have to go back and forth with people. You'll hear me say that probably every year, if not multiple times a year. You don't have to get their validation. You don't have to get their approval. You don't have to get their support. Somebody's not safe for you, then you are absolutely well within your rights to not be in spaces with people who do not allow you to feel safe. Then we have the limited contact, right? So we've talked about like, hey, there's some folks that I don't really like how you handled this. May not necessarily like that you keep inviting these people into the space when you know they're perpetrators. However, I want to see Nana this year. I know that she doesn't have many more years, so I'm gonna stop by, and then I'm gonna have that exit strategy ready. So sometimes that looks like you having a buddy with you. Sometimes that looks like you being able to have family members who are going to advocate for you, who can run interference. Sometimes that is going to look like, I give folks an hour. That's about my standard for people. But some folks can get 30 minutes because you could just roll in there, spend you 30 minutes with Nana, head on out and not have to interact with other people. Again, you may want to come early because you know other people are coming later. You may want to come see folks on a different day, and so that you're not even in a space with other people, because sometimes, and this is the unpredictability about seeing someone who has harmed you, you don't know how you may respond in those moments, whether you're going to freeze or you're going to fawn, whether you're going to fight, whether you're going to flee. So it's important for you to set yourself up to be successful. Do know that you also can do video and phone calls. You don't ever have to be in a space at all with people when you can see them on video. Hey Nana, how you doing? Look, girl, I wanted to tell you happy Thanksgiving, Merry Christmas. You look beautiful. Did you get what I sent you? Oh, good. You're going to put it on today. Well, look, I'm going to come by and see you next week. And you don't have to, you don't owe anybody anything. You don't have to tell people why you're not showing up. Don't feel like you got to make excuses for folks that, no, I'm not available. No, ma'am, I won't be available. And you stick it, you leave it at that, because oftentimes we give people too much information and that gives them opportunities to try to put holes in things. And then what kicks in? That sense of obligation. Well, oh, I should go, and no, I don't have to do any of that, because I have options about how I can manage to be around people that I love and care about without being around people who harm me. You definitely can send letters to people to let them know what's going on if it's difficult for you to be able to express yourself, because assertiveness can be very, very challenging when we experience trauma. To be able, again, I want to speak the words, they're in my head, I just can't get them out. Sometimes you're able to do that in the letters. In a letter, it might be to someone who has perpetrated violence. A letter might be to a family member in preparation for a visit so they can help navigate. A letter may be an explanation of what your boundaries are. And it is very important for you to have firm boundaries, whatever those boundaries are going to be. And this is where the therapy comes in handy, because then that can help outline what do those boundaries need to look like. Whether I'm, especially if I'm trying to work on particular behaviors that, and what people do when they're predators is their goal is always to catch you off guard, to manipulate you emotionally so that you're in a vulnerable space. And so in setting those boundaries, that allows you to be able to navigate when you're in spaces where you're not as vulnerable, and you're more firm and able to be clear about and not get misconstrued. People have very, very good skills when they're predators, being able to have you questioning everything. And next thing you know, you're in a situation where you don't want to be in again. And they like to catch you off guard. So they'll see you and you won't see them, and so you don't have a chance to respond, to be able to get on the defensive, try to catch you. So just being able to really kind of understand those things, which are, recognizing those triggers, but also being able to understand grooming behaviors, because we talk a lot about that when we see the documentaries, is how people will prime you, set you up. And so their goal is to start with little small things and get you to be okay with those small things, or at the very least not to be less resistant to them. And then they'll start introducing other things, and you look back and you realize how far you've come from what you wanted to set in the first place. And it becomes kind of the mental gymnastics piece of you negotiating with yourself around, well, if I love this person, or that's not that bad, or what they did was a long time ago. Like all of these things, when we talked about those cognitive distortions, that's often what some of those tools are in this grooming process, to get you to be less resistant to behaviors that people are introducing, and to convey these senses of potential security, right? Because again, this all goes back to the safety, the belonging, the connectedness we've talked about, getting those needs met. And so, what that predator often is going to do is dangle something in front of you that you desire, and set up an environment where you feel like, okay, I'll be able to have this thing if I just go along with and do this. And there, you'll never get that carrot. That's why it's dangling, because it's never meant for you to have. So I know this was a little longer than I tend to go, or I've gone in a little while, but I do feel like this is one of those, put a pin in it. There's somebody in your life who you love and care about who is struggling right now, to be able to advocate for themselves and to be able to be treated with the respect that they deserve, and who are losing a part of themselves to be able to feel like they belong, as we speak. And so share that with them. Also, I think just being an advocate, so even if this isn't your particular experience, share information for people who it may be their experience and you have no idea. People are silently struggling over the time, all over the place, all the time. We don't know about it because we got our own stuff going on. And sometimes we can be a little removed from that. When you see people being bullies and just spreading misinformation, drop a link for a trauma informed therapist like Tiffany. Drop a link on some articles that really talk about the physiological responses to trauma. Drop a link that talks about the cognitive and emotional um, fallout of experiencing a traumatic event. Like, you don't have to even say anything. You just drop that knowledge for people when you see that they're just spouting things that are inaccurate. And I don't think all the time people are intentionally trying to be disruptive and trying to be hurtful. I think that sometimes people are just uneducated. And so if you have time, right? Sometimes you're not, and you just keep on scrolling because some things are just ignorant and you don't need that in your spirit. But sometimes you will have time and you'll have an opportunity to be able to share. And even if that person doesn't receive it, somebody that's on that post may do it. So, all of that to say, you deserve safe spaces. You deserve to understand that what you have been through does not define who you are. You also deserve to be able to describe experiences that you've had, to be able to understand them, to be able to learn that you're enough and that you're of value, that you're loved, and that you can have loving relationships. And you get to do that without people questioning everything you did and dissecting it and breaking it down and trying to tell you why you didn't do enough. Okay, so this holiday season, whether you're in spaces with friends or family or coworkers, or community organizations or church, do know that you deserve to be safe and you deserve to be well.